O'Malley. I'm the Dean of Vermont Law School, and I see many faces here that I don't know. So welcome to Vermont Law School, and happy Earth Day, an important day. Many of the people in the audience, including myself, remember the first Earth Day, I can see. Yes. This is really important for us. It's appropriate that a law school that is devoted to environmentalism and to addressing climate should host something like this, and it's wonderful for us that the Sierra Club has collaborated with us on this. I want to thank in advance, there are going to be more thanks distributed later, to all the officials and NGO representatives who are here with us today, including Mark Nelson, who's chair of the Sierra Club local chapter, and of course Aaron Mayer, who is the president of the Sierra Club. So this is the issue of our time, as we all know, and I'm not going to take any more of the time. So welcome everyone, and Mark Nelson, would you take it from here? Thank you.
Again, thank you everybody for coming today. This really is a special event. We're very excited to have such a great turnout and very excited to have the panels that we have lined up for this event. I just have a few things to say. First of all, I'd like to thank Dean Mahaly for opening up the Vermont Law School campus to us for this event. This is really fantastic, and for providing the forum for this event. There's also some other folks that I wanted to thank real quick. The Vermont Law School staff for all of their behind-the-scenes help in making this event possible. I've got several to thank, so why don't we wait till the end, and then we'll just give one big round of applause. The Environmental and Natural Resources Law Clinic for helping to curate this event. Our speakers who have taken time out of their busy schedules to share their perspectives with us today. Professors Tracy Bach and David Mears, who are going to be moderating the panels. And then Rachel Stevens, who is on the Vermont Chapter Executive Committee and who is chair of our Forest and Wildlife Committee. And also a fellow here at the Environmental and Natural Resources Law Clinic, put a lot of her personal work and time into making this happen. So thank you everybody who went into making this a great day. I also want to thank the Vermont Energy Investment Corporation and the Linalac Foundation. They made a generous support to make this happen today and for their commitment to a cleaner Vermont. And then finally, before I introduce someone, I want to let you know a little bit about the Vermont chapter of the Sierra Club, if you're not familiar with what we're doing. The Sierra Club has roughly 56 chapters across the United States, and we're the chapter for the state of Vermont. We've got about 9,000 members and supporters in the state, and we're very much a small grassroots organization working to try to drive change in this state to protect our natural resources. For 2016, our key initiatives are we're working on combating forest fragmentation, cleaning up Vermont's waters, following up on Act 64 from last year, addressing carbon pollution in the state, and then saving our pollinators from the harmful effects of neonicotinoids. So those are our key initiatives we're working on. We've got several members from the executive committee today that are here. Could you guys and ladies raise your hands real quick? If anybody is interested in what we're working on, feel free to walk up to them and ask them and learn more. And we've got a table that will be at the reception after the event today. So, without any more discussion, I'd like to introduce Aaron Mayer, who is Sierra Club's 57th president. He became the Sierra Club member in 1999, following a decade-long battle that he led to shut down a polluting solid waste incinerator in an inner-city community in Albany. His efforts ultimately led to a commitment by the state to shut down the facility and provide a $1.6 million settlement award to that community. He was also a key figure in leading the fight and securing the Sierra Club's participation in the cleanup the Hudson campaign, which resulted in a settlement between the EPA and General Electric to dredge toxic PCP settlements from the upper Hudson River. He's held more than 36 leadership positions with the Sierra Club's Hudson Mohawk Group and Atlantic Chapter, including the chapter chair, chapter executive committee, and the environmental justice chair. He was elected to the Sierra Club National Board of Directors in 2011, and I guess because he had too much time on his hands, he decided to then become president. Throughout his tenure with the club, Aaron has demonstrated an unwavering commitment to grassroots action, environmental justice, and transforming the culture of the Sierra Club to make it, in his words, a more welcoming environment to all people, regardless of their race or socioeconomic status. And just so you know, Aaron had two choices of where to go today. One was here, or the other one was to be at the UN for the signing today. So I think it's pretty impressive that he came to join us, and please join me in welcoming Aaron Myers.
Since my clock keeps cutting off, but somebody can just flag me right around 15 minutes, and so I'll begin my rambling stream of conscience. But again, thank you. It is indeed an honor to be here. When we talk about being a grassroots organization and showing leadership of what matters at the elevating the grassroots, again, today, who would not want to be at the UN at the signing of one of the most significant climate agreements the planet has known, because of the sense of urgency being now, or being with the grassroots talking about movement building. I think that a lot of folks, if they got their priorities wrong, they would choose that event. But here, movement building is something that's critical and core. We only have this one planet. And to the extent that I have an opportunity to be at a law school, to talk to future thought makers, existing activists, community leaders, government officials, on how we can collaborate and come together because of this urgent crisis. The issue that I have, in spite of Sierra Club's humongous work, and I don't ever want to belittle or undermine that humongous work with regards to climate change and COP21. We have been in it from the beginning. We have been leaning on them from the beginning. But more importantly, not only doing that, but as you know, our famous battle against coal and shutting down the coal plants across this country, and really leaning in and being that market force and change. The real big issue about COP21 is that it's an agreement. It's not a treaty. And the problem with it being an agreement versus a treaty, the treaty, as you know, has a force of law. It has real metrics and real things that nations must do. Treaties transcend sovereign states' sovereignty by definition. It puts it on a par of mutual, as they say, dependence, but also mutually assured action. And coming up with less than a treaty is, as I would say, a cop-out. And so folks who've heard me give my cop-out talk, it's shame. Our hair should be on fire. We just saw the news, if not yesterday, today it's been breaking, because of the superheated Pacific Ocean, with the El Nino effects. As you know, the Great Barrier Reef off Australia is almost 95% bleached. That's huge. Add to that the rapid thawing and expansion, as they say, again, the freshwater melt with regards to our Arctic poles, and the rapid thawing and melting of Arctic ice, the polar ices, the amount of krill, which are essential for life in the oceans, are decreasing. So just the food supply for the seafood chain, from everything from coral, which are very important, to krill, which are very important. So coral in the tropics as a food supply for fish in a fish web, as well as the krill at the poles. And so when we see the collapse of the food supply for most marine animals and mammals, this is reasons for your hair to really be on fire, and why the flawing and applauds over a signing of an agreement is just not enough. It's just not enough. And the need to build this movement and the need to shock America into action is dire. Because again, the drag on this not being a treaty and the fact that it is an agreement is because of our failure of leadership. The United States is one of the most significant global players and global leaders, but it's also one of the significant consumers of global natural resources. You know, we are not only global resource hogs and pigs, but we also have a huge, massive carbon footprint. And more importantly, we lead the globe in climate science deniers. Now, there's a guy that's out there that one president called lying something, and y'all probably seen my famous debate with him, but it's true. And it was not really a debate. There's a lot of folks say, well, we saw you, he handed your hat to you on YouTube. I go, well, that's YouTube. But it's a hearing. Most of you here as attorneys know what a hearing is. I submitted over 50 pages of testimony on why government needs to increase regulations to protect communities that are right now frontline, fence line communities that are suffering under the weight of climate change, but also industrial pollution. And most of these are low income, poor, predominantly minority, or First Nation communities. So that was the reason why I was there at the hearing. And he went into a footnote citation on page 40 about the reference of 97% scientific consensus, which actually I was wrong because it's actually increased since then. But that being said, he wanted to use that to derail it and go into that point. But as you know, once you submitted sworn testimony, you're under oath. So when I'm there testifying to the fact and not wavering from the fact, that's not weakness. It's not a debate society or a shout down. For the small mind, for what I call the beer hats, it's an in-your-face moment, but that's not what the issue is. We have a crisis, and we have a senator who's in one of the most powerful nations on the face of the earth before the globe saying that our NASA scientists are a bunch of hacks, that the Union of Concerned Scientists are a bunch of liars, and more importantly, things are actually getting cooler in spite of the evidence, the overwhelming meteorological evidence that the earth has been systematically warming. And so to have our leaders and our politics held hostage, we must enlist and mobilize the population. So much so that I've reached out to union leaders, civil rights leaders, all those frontline community leaders that we came together through our democracy initiative, and as part of the march on DC with regards to Democracy Awakening, we basically risked breaking the law. It was the second time in Sierra Club's history to get arrested to push for a functioning democracy. Because at the end of the day, we're a nation of laws. And when one branch of government ceases to enforce, enact, or follow the law, then what's in action right now under the current framework must be challenged. So the unjust inaction must be met with just action. And so myself and a number of civil rights, in fact, some of you here, how many here were in D.C.? I think there was a couple. And you have an activist right here that were arrested in calling for our Congress to do its job. It's that simple. We have treaties, we have actions that need to be taken. The Clean Power Plan right now is being held up in limbo. There you go. And so these are things that action must be taken on. And so the gridlock, they call it gridlock, and let's be crystal clear. We haven't seen anything like this since 1860, in the 1860 race where we had President Lincoln. We haven't seen action like that. And what was the issue then? Whether or not people of color will be freed and whether or not the institution of slavery will be ended. And it's not a coincidence that you have an African-American president sitting there and you have the most blatant nullification and obstructionism that we haven't seen in over 150 years. The irony is not lost. It is what it is. All the more reasons why we must transcend color, background, orientation, and set that nonsense aside and come together to build this movement. And I came to the Sierra Club when I was fighting the toxics, as you heard a little bit of my resume. What motivated me, just like most parents or anybody, is the NIMBY aspect. It was in my backyard. And when two of my daughters were diagnosed with environmental asthma, as a father defending his child, or any parent defending their child, I was forced to take action. So not only did I take action, I was forced to take on the party that was responsible for that. It happened to be the state of New York running what it was called then a solid waste to energy incinerator that powered the entire government complex. In short, I had to sue my boss. And this is, again, leadership. And when it comes to your family, your community, when you see lives on the line that are impacted, you have a choice. Are you silent because of a profit or a dollar to be made? Or do you take action to save those you love, the community you love, your family you love, your children you love? So generalize it to now, I'm fighting for this very planet that I love, because we don't have an alternative planet, and we don't have an alternative food supply, no matter how inefficient we are about producing and living off the land here. I mean, we rely on Walmart and everything else, but still at the end of the day, we have a huge energy footprint. And what this requires us to do more and more is depend upon burning fossil fuels. So one of the things that I had to do then as now was take a step up to take an action, but more importantly, okay, 2 minutes, to be that face of change and take the risk. And so then as now, I'm glad I won. I could have been probably in another profession if the boss got tired of me. But at the end of the day, I think Governor Cuomo, which was Mario Cuomo, saw in his heart that I may disagree, and this guy may have embarrassed me, but I'm going to end up still doing the right thing because this community is bearing the brunt. Fast forward to COP change, COP21, it is now moving the Sierra Club in that vein. When I first went to the Sierra Club, when it came to that plant and that incinerator, give me 2 more. The first thing, I figured that they would be welcoming a person who's battling toxic, who's battling solid waste, who's battling burning garbage as a way of producing energy. I figured that they would be receptive. At least a friend of mine, a dear friend of mine who invited me to present to the Sierra Club to get assistance, believes so as well. When I went to the Sierra Club, the first thing that I entered into, it was in Lower Manhattan, of all places, one of the most diverse cities, which at that time probably had about a 65% minority population, a multi-ethnic population in New York City. So imagine me going into a room and it was literally a sea of white folks, which was interesting. This was the Sierra Club Atlantic chapter. And so I had to go and present my case. But as I was going up to make my case, as folks are coming up and greeting you and saying hello, I was asked, why am I here? Not, what is your name? Or where are you from? Why are you here? And after I made my case, some of the questions that came up, but the one that stuck out most in my mind, well, why did you go to the NAACP? So when people of color have an issue over the environment or toxics or fuels, they got to go to some ethnic organization. And mind you, this was at the height, actually the middle arc of the environmental justice movement. So, in other words, what they were saying is that black folks or Hispanic folks who have an issue with toxics or pollution should not be seeking out the environmental organization. By the way, the environmental movement, this is Earth Day. And the entire movement of Earth Day, its tactics, its strategies, came from the civil rights movement. So, it's fascinating for something that borrowed our tactics to win huge environmental successes, which we all should be grateful for. I'm being told to go. And that, to me, it hurt. It stung. I was voted down, by the way. And I vowed never to go back. But my friend who brought me there, it was a long 3-hour ride up the Hudson River Valley, back to Albany. And he spent that whole time in tears and just praying and just apologized. I said, Roger, for God's sakes, man, that's not you. I'm not judging you by what they are. I said, brother, I appreciate your heart that you tried to help and bring me to a source of help. Now you're just seeing how high the battle is and how high a mountain we must climb. I says, don't worry, brother. I said, it's not a thing. I says, we will do what we got to do. And we did what we had to do, and we won. NRDC, the Natural Resources Defense Council, Francis Beinecke out of Yale, and a bunch of other folks stepped up, got our backs, and we won. We went on to beat that plant. We won, and then not just beat, because that's the other issue. A lot of folks in low-income communities, they beat something, they feel that they won. I go, no, we want justice, because they denied us the right of equal treatment and equal protection under the law. And that's what justice is about. It's not about separate stuff for blacks. It's about making sure blacks, whites, anybody gets equal treatment under the law. That's why you're studying the law, right? Because at the end of the day, by the grace, not of God, but of law, should we be defiled, burned, harmed because of the failure to practice law, then everybody is cheapened and everybody is at risk. So, pushing that justice lens and argument, Roger came back to me like about a week later, and the local group, and this is when I learned that there's different levels within the Sierra Club, because everybody says Sierra Club and they think it's a monolith. It's really a balkanized thing of literally, hundreds of groups, chapters, and the national, and we quarrel like cats and dogs. But it's a beautiful quarrel, because the dialectic at the end of the day is that we come out with one voice and we save the planet. But the beautiful thing in that instant was I learned the power of a group in action. It's your backyard. So the Hudson Mohawk group got our back. They actually passed the hat, created our first foundation account for our community, and our first campaign sign of a pregnant woman with her child in the shadow of the incinerator with an umbrella with our campaign goals. Now, I was moved to tears when I said that these activists can come back and set aside what the state chapter failed to do. I said, this is where this is something here. And by the way, I did reach out to the NAACP, and I was waiting for them to get back to me. So the first person through the door was the first person who invited me out the door, but he came back with justice. And I told him, I said, something? Because of your action, I am going to join the Sierra Club. I'm going to become a member of the Sierra Club. And as a national leader at that time in the National Environmental Justice Movement, I told them I will work to transform that racist culture. That's right, I said it, racist culture, and make sure it becomes a just culture. That no other group, no other entity, because of their status, poverty, condition, orientation, or where they come from, would ever be turned away. That the issue relative to the environment and its threat to humanity is one of the things that would come first before we decide to act or not to act. But all their conditions. So fast forward, we create the Sierra Club's Environmental Justice Committee. It's Diversity, Equity, Steering Committee. And almost in 2.5 decades, we literally have been transforming the culture of this organization, not by polite asks, but by demands, examples, and action. And now I am proud to say we're the first national environmental organization. Yes, we are now. I guess we can say an environmental justice organization, but an environmental organization that's hired its first executive director for diversity, equity, and inclusion. In fact, none of the other major green groups have that executive level post. But more importantly, before we hired the person, we had to make sure that the culture, the norms, and the values were not taught, but written into our policies and our rules and our bylaws. And so within that 2.5 decades, we transformed, we did a lot of gutting of that old culture and stripped it down and rebuilt it right now to the point where I think it's one of the leanest, meanest, but deep greenest environmental organizations for justice and global equity. So that is a bit of our story, but I guess we'll probably save the chat for climate stuff and COP21 stuff because I'm over time. But I figured that was important for you to hear because many people assume that this is a token appointment. The Sierra Club is a grassroots organization. So you have to run on your actions, your deeds, and the content of your character. So I was elected from the grassroots to its state level, to its national level, by the walk I walk. The talk comes after, but any of you know me, I'm tenacious, as they would say, I guess that we'll leave it at tenacious. But we're dead serious about saving this planet and dead serious about building a diverse movement, because we cannot save the planet with the hate speech that you see coming out of the mouth of some politicians. We cannot save the planet without a UN-type effort domestically and internally and transcending all the contradictions. But more importantly, we're a nation of laws. We cannot save the planet without schools like Vermont School of Law producing some of the meanest, greenest, kick-ass environmental attorneys that this country can ever have.
All right, yeah, it's working. We'll keep these two separated. Hi, I'm Tracy Bach, Professor Tracy Bach. Can you hear me okay? Great. Yeah, I figured we'll pass that along is the idea. So I'm going to invite the first panel to come up. Come on up and I'll introduce you once you're here. So as Aaron teed up for us, this whole conference or this afternoon together, this discussion together, is taking place on the same day that the Paris Agreement, which was adopted at the end of COP21 on December 12th, 2015. Today it's being signed by over 100, I think it was up to 170 when I last checked today, heads of state. And that's the first step into ratifying the agreement. We're going to talk a little bit on our panel about the agreement itself, international law and why we need it to combat climate change, COP21 and its outcomes specifically, with a U.S. slant, I suspect, at times. And then at about 3:45, we'll transition to the second panel that will fulfill the mission of this afternoon to connect internationally what took place to what we're doing here in Vermont. So I've already introduced myself. I think the next step, since we didn't pass out bios to you, is just very, very briefly tee up, explain who's here on the panel. And I need my glasses for that. Aaron, I don't need to say any more. So we're lucky to have Aaron on our panel. And Aaron, you two were at COP21, I think.
That is correct.
Yeah. So next to Aaron is Pam Pearson. She's the director and founder of the International Cryosphere Climate Initiative. Pam is based up in Burlington, but she travels all over the world because this NGO is international, and I think she'll have a particular perspective on the Arctic for us. John Erickson is a professor, next to Pam, in the Rubenstein School of Environmental and Natural Resources, and he's a fellow of the Grund Institute for Ecological Economics up at UVM. I'm hoping that to hear a little bit about markets in particular and mitigation, but you have full field to explain the outcome of COP21. And our final panelist today is Cynthia Green. Cynthia is the manager of the Energy and Climate Unit at EPA New England. And I suspect that there will be many questions about connecting the U.S.'s COP21 pledges, or NDCs as we call it in the biz, nationally determined contributions. Just say NDCs, it's much easier. And the connection, of course, with the Clean Power Plan. So we have a couple of questions that we had discussed a little bit together that we wanted to answer. So we're not going to give presentations, there's no PowerPoint. That's the good news. Yeah, right. And so I'm going to tee up the first question. Actually, I think I'll assign it to John. Well, we got the two academics on the table here, and or on the dais here. And the question is, which is not really too theoretical, right, is why is having a global perspective on climate change, and in particular climate change mitigation and adaptation, important? That's certainly what COP21 or its base agreement, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which we call the UNFCCC, that's what it's all about. So I'm going to start off with John. We're all going to try and keep our answers short, but we're going to round the horn here, and then we'll go on to the second question.
Well, thanks, and thanks for having me. I guess in some ways that's the easiest question we'll wrestle with. You have global problems, you need global solutions, global institutions. When we teach environmental policy, we often talk about a principle of subsidiarity, right? If you're going to attack a problem in its policy domain, you need an institution at that level. It's hard to imagine that we need a global institution to tell us how to collect local garbage. But when we're talking about a global problem like greenhouse gas emissions and a global consequence like global climate change, we need strong institutions, strong treaties, not just vague targets. And we need strong bodies like the United Nations that can help us get us there. I'll say something that's maybe heresy amongst this crowd. We need, for example, a really strong World Trade Organization. One that is a standard raising organization, not a standard lowering organization, right? Because our biggest challenge of effectively dealing with climate change at a global level is that we can't allow trade to create a kind of race to the bottom, and that's what we have right now. A lot of the discussion around climate change is around justice. It's around who's going to do their fair share. It's around reducing emissions in the global north so that the global south has room to develop. We can't do that really without effectively dealing with carbon and carbon that's embodied in our trade. And so global problem, global solutions.
Yep, pass the mic to whoever.
It's a global issue, exactly as he said. Greenhouse gases don't stay within borders. They don't stay within local or nation borders. They go all around the globe. So what we emit here is affecting other places in the world. So we all have to attack this as a global nation all together. Otherwise, we won't really solve the problem. Simple.
Yeah, I obviously second that. A couple of other points. One, you talked about nationally determined contributions. Going back to what you said about this not being a treaty but an agreement, it's actually further weakened. It's intended nationally determined contributions, INDCs, very weak. This is not a treaty, and it really needs to go beyond that. The other thing I'd say is that the impacts are global, and the impacts actually, particularly something that we work very much on, which is sea level rise, coming as a result of the loss of these ice caps at both poles in particular, is going to hit the poor earliest, and it is going to hit the poor hardest. And so it is not just a matter of course, environmental justice within the United States, but globally. And for that, you really do need a global agreement.
And that gets me to my point of the cop out. And part of this agreement, there's something, two areas. One is Article 5 and Article 2, and they were pushed aside. And this dealt with the communities that are on the front lines. So their rights were pretty much in this weakened document swept away. So what does that mean? So when it comes to adaptation, mitigation, but also the setting aside the funds to deal with damages and loss, the person in the first world said, since we're now at an agreement level, well, listen, we don't want to contribute anything. In fact, a lot of our own Congress was so as the United States delegation was negotiating on one end, you have our Congress back in the United States making news in the other end of saying what we're not going to pay for, what we're not going to participate in. And this is really embarrassing. Think about it. We're talking about this international agreement, and we need something that's strong at the international and institutional level. And what's critical to that strength is making sure that it's funded, and how nations are going to be passing the hat to that. Basically, you, the taxpayer, we're going to be paying for this. And the other piece, domestically and internally, was how is industry going to be paying for this? Well, I happen to be at a breakout conversation with the BBC, and there present was the head of the United States agency, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and he was making that argument, about strong, let markets drive it. He said that he recognized that there was climate change, but he felt that industry could solve the problem, which was really kind of my jaw just dropped on the table while I'm listening to the head of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce acknowledge what we were all there for, and that action needed to be taken. But his approach was that it doesn't need to be top down, that industry should be allowed to be part of this solution. And I'm saying, wow. And I turned to the guy, I said, I hope you're getting this. Because I said, back in the United States, this is the same U.S. Chamber of Commerce that is leading the denial effort. And this is why I have very little faith in things like the WTO. Because these are things in institutional arrangements where our U.S. Chamber of Commerce is a huge player. The average common citizen and the universities and those who have common sense are not at that table negotiating this. And this is really critical. And so we understand it's not enough to just say that these institutions need to be in place, but knowing who the players are and who the actors are at the table and whether or not they have the credibility to speak to action and change that will get us on the path to reducing carbon and reducing climate change. And that's a very critical piece. And so what's really, again, the cop out is that the U.S. is playing this three-card Monty Python game. And so we're having this very serious affair in the United States, at the UN, within our territorial borders. Think about it. In a nation that has serious climate denial amongst major policymakers within one branch of government. So, yes, we should be applauding the fact that there's an agreement. And that, but we need more than just acknowledging that it's raining outside or that the earth is heating up. We need real action because at the end of the day, our species, is no longer a 50-year-out problem. Now, we're now talking about serious change within the next 20 to 30 years. Within the next 20 to 30. Some of you young women and men don't even have families yet. Right now, we're playing with the lives of even their posterity, my grandchildren. So this is why it cannot be just simply just the global, this is nice that we're having this talk in this academic level. All the more reason why our hair should be on fire. And the minute that we drop this mic and finish this symposium, we should be writing, blogging, I'm about to, my Navy side was about to come at it. Something to the wall action.
So I'm going to cop in for a moment. And maybe I've been in the classroom a little long, but that's actually kind of a joke because the class that I teach at International Climate Change Law takes students to the COPs every year. We actually do service learning and support a least developed country to help prepare and help them engage in the negotiations. And in fact, I'm so pleased to announce that most of the students are here today. So could everybody who went to COP21 please stand up so everybody could see you? Rachel, of course, is one of them. There you go. Thank you. So thank you for clapping for them because one of the ways we have copped in is for the last 3 months we have been putting together a resource that's at our blog. So if you want to go to VLS COP, and it's probably then .vermontlaw.edu, you'll find a new page that we've just created that was launched about 2 hours ago called the COP21 documentation project. But we've been doing our Harry Potter allusions or allegories, so we call it the pensieve. And you'll see a picture of those folks in the back room getting their thoughts down into the pensieve. Because, why do I say cop in? Well, one, I can totally appreciate why most people would see this not as a treaty, but as an international lawyer, I can tell you that this is a treaty. And that's why 170 or so world leaders came to New York today, and that's why they signed it. And in fact, at least a half dozen developing countries at this point have already done the next legal step, which is called depositing their instruments of ratification. Their countries have now already ratified it. Second, about a month or so ago, the two biggest greenhouse gas emitters in the world, China and the US, again made a bilateral announcent, which grew out of this multilateral agreement, this unilateral climate change action. Did I say multilateral, not unilateral. That's the US a long time ago. And what China and the US did have said that they are going to act on the requirements in the new agreement very quickly. In fact, there's some talk that rather than it coming into force in 2020, which is what all the negotiators were planning on back in December, there's talk that it may come online as early as 2017. Why? Because for this to come into effect, the Paris Agreement requires that at least 55 countries representing 55%
of the global greenhouse gas emissions ratify it. And if US and China, and possibly India, you get those three in, we're really all the way there. But then you have a number of developing countries. So let me take a step back because I'm hogging the microphone, but I do want to give a different perspective, that this is a legal agreement. Countries who ratify it will follow it as a matter of law. What's in it? No, it's not like the Kyoto Protocol where there are percentage caps on mitigation caps on emitting greenhouse gases. It's a process-based agreement. And yes, there were INDCs, which are intended nationally determined contributions. Those were made before the COP. I call them in one of my blog posts a practice run. In the agreement itself, the commitment that countries are making is to contribute a nationally determined contribution. That sounds like I understand wordplay, but it's significantly different. Because what did we learn in the INDCs? Well, one, countries didn't pledge enough. So we didn't stay under the 2C cap, which is now more aggressively, happily, in the Paris Agreement in Article 2, saying that we should keep global warming to as close or under, if we could, 1.5C. The agreement doesn't say under 1.5C. It says close to. That's not the exact language. Okay, so now countries, when they ratify, they're going to make nationally determined contributions. They'll look a little bit like, or a lot like the INDCs, but they're going to be ramped up. And then every 5 years, what is a legal requirement under the agreement is they will review. The whole world will chunk it all out, say, did we meet 2C or not? Did we meet 1.5C or not? And then pledge again. That's the requirement. Those are the requirements of the new agreement.
But the point is, pledge again. There's no major enforcement mechanism. There's no penalty. There's no hammer. But meanwhile, we can, within that 5 years, just clock global climate change as incrementally. The next year will be warmer than the preceding. So
I'm going to pass the mic to Cynthia for a moment, because I think this is a good time to transition about what you do with your pledges as a national government. Because remember, it's national governments that are part of this treaty, not states. States have a lot to do, not businesses, they have a lot to do, not NGOs, they have a lot to do.
And I want to go to your second question that you had given to us, which was how was this COP different than the other COPs? And I think you explained it very well, in that the INDCs were required. That had not happened in the past, and I think in my looking at what had happened here, there was supreme diplomacy that happened in this case, and they were really thinking ahead, asking those countries by March to come in with those INDCs before the December meeting, and then changing them over to the NDCs. In the case of the United States, we came in and said it would be between 26 and 28%, looking at several different things that the government already had in place or in play. One of them that we've been working on for quite some time is automobiles, and as you know, that we already have an agreement to reduce the miles per gallon. In a decade, we'll be able to drive twice as far as we have been able to on 1 gallon of gas. We'll get to the equivalent of 54 miles per gallon. And in Vermont, I know that's really important because your greenhouse gases, your percentage on transportation is higher than other places in the country. Also, I know you want me to talk about the Clean Power Plan. It's expected, that's the largest source of greenhouse gases in the United States, is from the power sector. So it's a very important sector for us to try and control. The Clean Power Plan that we have proposed and finalized would get us 32% reduction by 2029. And it is a ramped down, very doable plan. We believe very legally defensible. As you know, in February, there was a stay to that plan. So the agency cannot enforce. We cannot implement at all under that stay. However, we are working towards making the implementation go well. So we're using this time to get ready for when we think it will go forward. Oral arguments will be June 2nd, and we expect to have a decision by the end of the summer, and then it's up to the Supreme Court to determine. We have other actions that we have been taking looking at methane. We have proposed something for new sources of methane, and we are in the process of gathering information to do something about existing sources of methane. There's also the hydrofluorocarbons, and we are working on new alternatives to HFCs, and there's a Montreal Protocol meeting in Vienna this summer. So there was a lot of talk after the Supreme Court decision to stay the Clean Power Plan, that how would the United States make that 26 to 28% NDC. And we believe we can still make it without the Clean Power Plan. There's also the market forces that are happening. We have 3 times more wind power in this country and 20 times more solar power in this country than when Obama was elected. So there are market drivers, and there are also the regulations that we are putting forward. So we think we will get there, but we hope that all the signing, the 175 that signed today, as well, Kerry's already signed. I watched the little YouTube video. He was there with his granddaughter, which I thought that was wonderful. We will go forward, and hopefully we'll make these reductions from the United States.
So, others. Our second question was, how is COP21 different from the past? And I think we could put that together with the U.S.'s perspective on this. How is COP21, how is it different? What kind of outcomes are we going to see in the United States? And then I think where we need to go in order to relate to, thanks. I think people can hear me though, right? In order to relate to the next panel is, how does that translate from the national contributions, pledges, I would call them commitments, because there's some shells in that language, and how does that translate into the subnational, whether that's states, businesses, other NGOs?
Well, one of the things is that at subnational, can everybody hear me?
I scored the video.
The video, okay, very good. At subnational level, again, this is all predicated, again, that with the Clean Power Plan and these actions at the federal level using the existing regulatory framework to compel states to act. The challenge essentially is that it's government overreach, and the government is stepping on the rights and power of states to regulate these matters, and so they're pushing back, and so far it's stuck. 2 things that are very important to happen, because I think that you need to find very interesting ways that the president, using the State Department and private sector business like Bloomberg, have actually gone a way around it. Because one of the things they've done, they have these initiatives with cities and local jurisdictions to basically, whether the government acts, the federal level acts or not, there are actions at localities, the micro level, that they can take to actually push and drive action. And again, voluntary, and there's still a high intersectionality of politics and voting. And I think at a micro level where you are at right now is that, how does this relate to your vote? Well, right now, the down ticket of senators and congresspeople who will have the capacity to push progressive, pro-planet and anti-climate change legislation, right now, these are critical people in the down ticket. And the intersectionality right now is, where do you vote? And how do you vote to get these people in, to get the justice in, to, as I say, to make sure we have a fully functional Supreme Court, but more importantly, get Congress people in who, A, are not denying, and B, that are going to be pro-action. So the thing is that not only just looking at the framework or the roadwork that's been laid by COP21, the issue is getting the American vehicle on that road, the American green vehicle on that road. And this election cycle is probably the most powerful intersectional point. This is why we need to look at that down ticket, not just at the president, but really look at those who get it. And if anybody is denying, I don't care what their party is, and they're pledging to block, I think that folks need to mobilize their grassroots, their academics. This is one of those times where we just can't sit back, wait and see. because we're losing ground with every day and every month that goes by.
Sure, I can add to that, because I think there is a bit of a silver lining here of what's happening at the state level. For example, with or without the Clean Power Plan, by some estimates, the U.S. has already reduced greenhouse gas emissions by about 11% as of last year. So we're getting close to halfway there of our, we'll call it a pledge to commitment for 2025. When you look at what cities and states are doing, there's over 100 cities now who have joined Bloomberg and others to actively create climate action plans. There is, by my count, nearly half of U.S. states have said, despite this Supreme Court ruling, we are moving ahead with commitments, plans under what would have been regulated under the Obama rule. I wrote down some other facts here just to show you what's happening at the state and how important the down ballot initiatives and down ballot candidates are. 33 states and territories right now, including DC, have renewable portfolio standards, the majority of which are regulatory standards, not just wishy-washy goals, but actual standards. 27 states, so over half of our states, have public benefit funds for energy efficiency and renewable energy improvements. 45 states have utilities with net metering. And the majority of those are statewide net metering rules like we have here in Vermont. 42 states have green pricing. 26 states have energy efficiency resource standards, which are aggressively pursuing energy efficiency. I could go on. I think the most exciting is that 23 states have now statewide emissions targets. Again, these are the things that lack the regulatory teeth, but they are things that are public. For example, here in Vermont, we have greenhouse gas targets that we are currently missing, but it gives our NGOs, it gives our public sector, it gives academics like myself the ability to say why and how and why not and why aren't we hitting our targets. And 36 states have comprehensive climate action plans. So in many ways, our commitment under COP21 isn't all that brave. We're moving in that direction anyways. So most of these states view that as the bare minimum. And in many ways, the Clean Power Plan wasn't all that brave, because we're actually doing that anyways. We're moving in that direction anyways. So, the best thing that a politician can do is pass something into law and take credit for something that's happening anyways. So that's a little bit of the silver lining of what's happening at the state and local level.
I thought I would talk a bit about, how it is different. And as an ex-negotiator, as an ex-diplomat, there's a huge difference between commitments and pledges. And, if you do a slip of the tongue in talking in Paris, which I did at one point, you get excoriated. There really is a difference. And for those negotiating, there's a huge difference. And, that's unfortunate. But at the same time, because of the structure of this agreement, there is a kind of a silver lining. One way in which this is different, because I was part of the Kyoto negotiating team as a junior diplomat at that point, everybody is in the agreement, which was not the case with Kyoto. So that is huge. The U.S. was initially part of Kyoto and then got backed down by its own Senate, and so ultimately was not, but we are a part of this agreement, so that's important. The other silver lining, though, is that it does indeed allow for the agreement to be strengthened. There is pre-2020 ambition. In other words, before the agreement comes into force, there are actions that can and should be taken to slow the warming. But this is one reason why I am both optimistic but incredibly pessimistic. I work on cryosphere, snow and ice regions, okay? We haven't had much cryosphere here this year. There's a reason for that, obviously. But these regions are different. And they used to be called the canary in the coal mine. Right now, they are turning increasingly into drivers of climate change, and drivers that you cannot stop once they get going. And there needs to be a bit of a paradigm shift, and our whole focus as an organization at COP21 was this report called Thresholds and Closing Windows. You can find it online. But the basic premise was really two things. Number one, INDCs have been looked at by the OECD, by a number of independent organizations, and they will result in temperatures in 2100 between about 2.7 and 3.4 degrees. But that's only 2100. And, you were talking earlier, Erin, about the what's going to happen in the next 20 or 30 years. But 2100 is used as a benchmark by climate negotiators. Temperatures continue rising for hundreds of years after that. And so you really need to look at 2300 in terms of the ultimate temperature if you stop greenhouse gases at a certain point, at this point in time. And there the INDCs are looking at 3.4 to 4.2 degrees. And that is these pledges. They are not commitments, and there's no guarantee that they are going to be met. If they are met, that will be the ultimate temperature of the globe. That is nowhere near enough. And one of the reasons it's nowhere near enough, and what we tried to lift up to leaders, we had a lot of scientists with us in Paris to talk to their own leaders, their own national delegations. We began seeing this reflected. Once things get started, in some cases, you can't stop it. And what I'm talking about then, we talk a lot, and we work a lot, by the way, with the air, which is one way to slow down the warming, like focusing on things like on for so long. If you can take the air pollution down, the health problems, other than the ones of the people who, were alive and exposed to them, but in many cases, those health problems would disappear. If you deal with the water pollution, then species hopefully will come back to that river system, say. If you exceed 1.5 degrees, probably you're going to lose Greenland. And it will continue to be lost even if you are able to take the temperature back down to 1 degree, or even back down to pre-industrial levels. Once a lot of these ice sheets get moving, they keep on going. And that's the problem. The West Antarctic ice sheet has probably already tipped at today, which is about 1 degree. And it doesn't matter if you take it down to pre-industrial. It's still going to keep on going, and you're looking at 3 to 4 meters sea level rise just from the West Antarctic ice sheet. And that is why it is so important not to exceed these goals, not to exceed 1.5 ever, not to exceed 2.0. We can't go up and come down again and avoid this. And that's why this sort of long look is so important. It's going to take centuries to take place. It's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen in 2100. It's not even going to happen in 2300. But the point is, it will happen, and we won't be able to stop it from happening. And so that's why it's so important for this generation to take action and to stop that, that irreversible threshold from being passed. Because we are getting to a point in temperature and CO2 levels where in the past Antarctica was completely deglaciated. That's 60 meters of sea level rise. And, okay, so we're going to have hundreds of thousands of years to deal with it, but do we really want to live in a globe that looks like that? So it is so important then to have this flexible agreement. I would prefer to see commitments, but at least if we can get the science out there, if the grassroots can get activated and get their hair and all parts of their bodies on fire to really put this forward to leaders. I'm convinced that a lot of the leaders who are deniers really know what's going on. They just don't care enough because their constituents are not pushing it. Once the constituents start pushing it, I think they're going to have a lot more courage.
And this is really, really huge. And if you think about some of the leading thought makers that are pushing to not, like the Coke industries, look at their age. So actuarially, the old economic, model of in the long run we're all dead, so why should I care? I want to live for today. I'm going to take it with me. But the point is they're taking the entire human species and all other species with them. And this is really huge. And another little point on your point with regards to measurement, and again, the intersectionality of us voting for leaders that matter. Just in the past year, a couple of folks at the National Science Foundation and others who are doing the studying of the ice sheets and doing the measurements. One of the airports that they take off out of is Albany. They use the Albany National Guard as part of the airlift that takes people to the Arctic and Greenland. And one of the things that the current Congress did as part of its budget reconciliation is went after the budgets that actually pay for the fuel that takes the scientists out there. So not only are they attacking the science, they're actually disrupting the actual measurement. They're actually impacting. So now the National Science Foundation, and they have to come up with ways to, bundle up trips. So they're screwing with people trying to do their jobs to get us clear and accurate information. And this is one of those things that we have a patient called the planet Earth that's on ICU, and every ping and every chart matters. Every data point matters. And while these folks are up there calling the scientists hacks, they're actually now interfering with their ability to even do their job. And this is how serious the politics matter. So these workshops are important because we get to share these things. I bet you none of you knew that they are attacking the budgets for these flights that are taking the scientists out to do their measure. But this is one of the things why these things are powerful. Folks down there, I guarantee at the UN probably know, definitely, the White House knows. But the point of the matter is, all the more critical, hair, everything on fire. This is really serious stuff. What she's talking about is not only ice melt and sea level rise, but also, remember, these ice sheets are very heavy. They hold landmass. So you got landmass rises, and what that's doing at a systems level with regards to tectonic plate shifts. So will there be more earthquakes and other things as these things start to shift and move? But again, the most critical element is the number of our planet that depend upon their protein source coming from the ocean and species crashing with regards to food supply in the ocean. And the first world dictating, what is going to be supplied through USAID to help out with these countries that will be starving. Right now, one of the big things that we're doing, we're burning corn for ethanol, for fuel. So we've taken a lot of grain out of the world food supply so we can use it as fuel. We're burning it for fuel. And now through our own inaction, we have the real systemic threat of species crash with regards to fish populations in the ocean and what that's going to mean for population shifts and global conflicts. So this is really bad. We're celebrating, yes, there's 170 nations today recognizing that, we're screwed. And the question is how seriously screwed we are within the next 20 and 30 years. And what does it mean for deployments of our military as populations start to shift due to trying to find food and migration? There's going to be a whole lot of destabilization. The military, the Pentagon, has already put forward forecasts. A lot of these models are playing out. So again, you should be very, very, very alarmed. And the question is, again, where and how are you venting and leveraging your action to, as I say, put pressure on our state and national leaders?
All right, so I'm noticing the time, and we're getting toward the end of the first panel. So what I'd like to do is to ask one last question, to ask us each to try and stay within maybe 1 or 2 minutes in answering it. Because I think in making the connections here, what we've heard is that while there is an international agreement, which I'm very comfortable calling a treaty, because under international law, it fits the definition of a treaty. It does. So I know, but
no. But that's the deception. We got it.
But it's not deception. The reason it's not to fudge an agreement versus a treaty.
But the words feel good, but the reality is, relative to action, it's bullcrap. To be quite honest.
No. I hear what you're saying. So one of the reasons that I'm not in New York at the signing ceremony and here is because I think that this, from the perspective of the 24-year history of international negotiations and action on climate change, this is now the third iteration of a regulatory structure to try to get individual nations to do the right thing. The Kyoto Protocol, which I think you'd be comfortable calling a treaty,
Yes,
right? Because it's a protocol, it's got a word, was effective to some degree in that the parties that signed on to it, which did not include the U.S., it included Canada withdrawing, and in the period of commitment that's going on under the protocol right now, we have even more nations not being a part of it. So its scope was limited, what it could do. Within Europe, a lot of significant greenhouse gas reduction changes, real changes of lifestyle, have occurred. We're learning from them. So where I take solace in the strength of the Paris Agreement is that in the third iteration here, we have, as Pam said, all nations involved. Second, in this bottom-up approach, we have nations building on the climate change regulation that they're doing internally to reach up to the international standards that the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has told us, based on years of research, we should be meeting. I think this is the best hope for getting the connection between the global emissions that each country puts out there and the grassroots work that we have to do within the United States to achieve them. So I'm going to pass the mic. I know I took more than 2 minutes. I apologize. But I needed to set that structure, and I'm happy to answer any questions about the Kyoto Protocol or this thing, this treaty. But I'd like to ask the panel in closing thoughts as we hand off to David and the next panel that will focus on Vermont, is when you think about the international agreement and you think about what the U.S. is doing or other countries nationally, what would be your one piece of advice to a subnational entity like Vermont for making change, walking the talk? I think
We're going to start there and I'll give you the last one.
You sure you want to do that?
Well, one of the things that made this COP also different was that the idea that every 5 years they had to come back and say what they were doing, what their plans were to go forward. And the subnationals have a huge role to play because they can do things that the nations cannot. So the subnationals include the locals, the states, the NGOs, and the businesses. And there was just a press release yesterday from Ceres that over 100 companies have come forward saying that they're behind the agreement and are going to take steps if they haven't already. So I see Vermont as being able to be one of those subnationals that can step forward and do a lot to push this nation as well as others in innovative ways. And Pam made great statements as to the big issue of adaptation. We can't just do the reductions in greenhouse gases. The impacts are already here, and we really seriously need to look at how do we adapt to the new climate that we have.
Thank you. Vermont has a tremendous opportunity right now to show some leadership. One of those areas where we could really lead the nation is in our energy pricing policy. The United States is an absolute anomaly when it comes to what we pay for fossil fuels, an anomaly. So we currently pay about 60% of the world average at the pump when we fill our cars. If you translate that into affordability, if you take the average wage of an American worker, it costs less than 2% of an average wage, which isn't much to brag about. The average wage of an American worker, less than 2% for a gallon of gas. Compare that to India or Pakistan, where it takes a full day's wage for 1 gallon of gas. The only countries where gasoline is more affordable by that metric than the United States are Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Venezuela. So we are an anomaly. We are a rich nation with some of the lowest gas prices in the world. We haven't raised our federal gas taxes since 1993. It is stuck at 18.4 cents. Okay? If you translate that into effective carbon tax, so run around the world and say, what are countries now effectively paying in a carbon tax? Look at the richest countries, the OECD countries, okay? The U.S. is at the bottom of the barrel with Mexico. Mexico is about $6 a metric ton of carbon. The U.S. is a few pennies above that. The highest is $141. We have a $6 to $141 spread right now on what countries effectively pay in carbon, and we're at the bottom of the barrel. The good news, again, silver lining, is at the state level, there's a huge diversity of experience around energy taxes, okay? 12 states in the last 3 years have raised their taxes on gasoline. Another 12 have gas tax legislation in the pipeline. The spread of energy taxes, when you look across the states, the low end is Alaska, 30 cents. The high end is Pennsylvania at 70 cents. You got a 40-cent spread there. Okay, Vermont is right in the middle. Vermont's about 49 cents on the gallon of gas tax lien, which pushes about the U.S. average. If you look in the region, New York is above us, Massachusetts is above us, Connecticut, Rhode Island are above us. New Hampshire's a few pennies less, and Maine's about the same. We have legislation right now, okay, in the Vermont State House that could make Vermont to become the first state in the country to move towards a carbon pollution tax. That's where we could really show some leadership. We could work with neighboring states on a levelization of gas taxes through a carbon tax, much like we've done through our RGGI legislation of a permit system amongst our electric utilities. We have the opportunity to take the U.S. by leading through example at the state level, which I'm sorry is the only way it's going to happen, to raise and just start to catch up. Well, let's just catch up with our NATO allies, right? All the NATO countries pay 2-3 times the price of gasoline that we do. Us in Canada, bottom of the barrel. So that's where the difference is, and that's why, as an average American citizen, we consume 4.5 times the energy per person than the average global citizen. And it's by no accident. It's because we pay some of the cheapest fuel prices in the world.
I agree with everything you've said. I'm going to up the ante a bit, I suppose. Okay, so we're looking at, with current INDCs, at about 4 degrees total temperature rise. We need to take that down to 1.5 degrees. Even at 1.5 degrees, we will lose Arctic sea ice. We will, even at 1 degree, unfortunately, and definitely at 1.5 degrees, most mountain glaciers, 80% of mountain glaciers, are doomed. They will not be preserved in the Andes and Scandinavia. The only place we're going to see mountain glaciers are in the Himalayas, maybe in high Siberia, maybe in high Canada. Everything else is gone. There's just no way we can preserve it. That's a very sad reality. And by the way, everything I'm saying is very well grounded in scientific fact and in AR5. This is not speculation. This is very, very well accepted science. What I would love to see Vermont do, and a big movement even pre-Paris, was talking about carbon neutrality by 2050. That's too late if we're really trying to make 1.5 degrees, even with all the losses at 1.5 degrees. I would love to see the state of Vermont come up with a plan to become carbon neutral, say by 2025 or 2030. Even one state upping the ante in that way, the way a few national governments have chosen to do, even having a plan to how we could get there, could really, really lead a lot of other states. And I think Vermont has the will. It has, in a sense, the knowledge of climate change. We see it in, what's happening with snow. We see it in, ski resorts, what's happening to them. We see it in the mapling season. All of these things that affect an awful lot of Vermonters. And so I think that's one way Vermont can sort of move the pieces forward a bit in the United States, the way it has in the past in a lot of ways. It's a very ambitious goal, but it's what is necessary, and simply the message saying, this is what's going to be necessary, folks, could be really, really important for one state to do. The other thing I would say, though, greenhouse gases are the most important part of things and what we really need to focus on when I'm talking about that plan. But Vermont has one very important short-lived climate pollutant, as they're called, source, and it's black carbon soot from wood stoves. And There are ways to cut black carbon emissions simply by using your stoves properly, burning them right. You can cut your black carbon by 30 to 60%. That could actually have a demonstrable effect on the microclimate of Vermont itself, potentially. But definitely, if you had New Englanders and people in Quebec and the eastern provinces of Canada, which is where you see a lot of wood burning, either moving to more efficient wood stoves or simply doing burn right and cutting their emissions 30 to 60%, that actually has an impact on our local climate and even, believe it or not, on places like Greenland, because that's the way the wind blows. And so seeing a focus on that particular source here would really help human health, and it would really slow warming locally. So it's something to think about.
Well, I'm probably going to get a load of tweets, and I'm probably going to hear from our press people as, that's probably one of the reasons why my pocket is buzzing right now. Somebody probably tweeted something I said. But to be clear, this agreement today is a historic arrangement. It's unprecedented. Our organization has been at the forefront in driving and supporting our president, the State Department, in getting this historic agreement, working with a lot of NGOs around the world. But let's be candid, it's not enough. It's way short of the runway. We don't get to do the do-overs. The answer to short is they got to leave this in the ground. Leave the carbon in the ground, number one. Number two, leave it in the ground. Number two, things that Vermont can do is stop the pipeline transmission. If we're going to be serious about walking away, you got to have a carbon tax. You got to leave it in the ground, but also we can't be enablers. The dishonest thing is that you can have a state that boasts that we don't do fracking like the state of New York, but then all of a sudden allow all the transmission lines. The indigenous culture has framed our culture well about the forked tongue. We say one thing out one side of our mouth, but do something out the other side. So I think the team's simply to get a hold of this.
Here in Vermont.
Well, it's nationwide. Because again, we go back to the Kyoto Protocol. It's not that we stepped away. We know what part of the government we had. The Clinton administration, Al Gore pushed for us to get to that space. But it's the intersectionality of our domestic politics. It's our domestic politics. If we want to be candid and tell the world, the American domestic politics has an outsized influence that's now threatening humanity. Okay? It was when Bush came in, they laughed and mocked Al Gore. Okay, and they, with all that we've seen the stuff. But the fact of the matter is, when we start making, anthropogenic climate change a joke, and it's something that's like a kindergarten, laughable ass, we're killing the planet. At the end of the day, here we are, decades later, things are worse, and we still have that segment of America thinking it's a joke. And we the citizens, we the people have to be the adults in the room to basically put in the domestic politics that pushes that nonsense out. And right now we have a choice in November. Not only at the presidential level, because that's not going to cure it. The real issue is because it's the legislature, the House and the Senate, that determines whether or not our planet really is going to die, because it's going to determine whether or not America steps up to the plate. It owns the mess that it's created for the past 3 decades of denial. We got to get in the game. America has to seriously get in the game. So things that Vermont can do is push for the most progressive, pro-planet, downstate ticket it can and put them in the House to raise their voice. Like that little other beautiful senator that you got running around. You got to raise your voice. Okay, this is the time not to be silent. Your posterity depends upon it. And insofar as the markets are critical. We got to have a carbon tax. And more importantly, not just the tax, but what we invest that revenue in. That revenue must go into 100% clean energy. We have to not advantage the carbon sector over the clean energy sector. Vermont can be a leader. It can start creating cooperatives. It can absolutely use these carbon tax to finance a new grid. Smart grid infrastructure. So yes, the utility says, well, that's expensive. That's because you're paying shareholders. Get the shareholders and the monkey business out and put the people in and invest in the infrastructure that we need. Vermont can be our state's shining green hope.
So that's a perfect ending point for the transition to the new panel. Just want to remind you, if you want to learn more about the international side of things, Google VLS and COP, and you'll find lots of resources there. I'd like you all to join me before we do the transition, thanking Cynthia, John, Pam, and Aaron for the opening comments today. I just want to let everyone know there will be opportunities for questions at the end of the panel. So we're just going to take just one moment to switch, and then we'll have an opportunity to ask questions.
Right, got it.
All right, we're going to get started. Please grab your seats. Grab a parachute. Grab the person next to you. Give them a hug, a handshake. All right, welcome to Vermont Law School. Welcome to Vermont Law School on Earth Day. I wanted to start out with a quick reference and a shout out to our colleague here at Vermont Law School, Gus Speth. Those of you who are students here already know this, but Gus Speth was one of the folks that was around when Earth Day, the first Earth Day happened, and was one of those doers and actors and shapers of the environmental policies that we have in place today. He wrote a book recently called Angels by the River, in which he references and supports what Aaron was describing, that the fact that the environmental movement has its origins in the civil rights and justice movements of the 60s. And I start out there because I want to make sure that we keep this conversation as a celebration. It is easy when you're talking about climate change and global climate disruption to be pretty pessimistic. But let's choose to make this day a day in which we celebrate the fact that we are working together as a society, as a community here in Vermont and across the nation and the world to make a difference. We're addressing and acknowledging that these folks, the leaders and heroes that are up here today, those of you who are in the audience who have chosen to spend your time working on these issues, we should choose this moment to celebrate the opportunities to transform society in a way that will make a difference. So, thank you. Thanks for all being here. So let me just quickly introduce this really amazing panel. And we need about 6 hours of time to really get all of the amazing ideas that they have to offer. And we're going to jam it into this little compressed time. But I'll start by introducing Andy Kolnes. Andy, did I pronounce your name right?
Yeah.
Excellent. Sorry. Andy is the executive director of the Energy Action Network here in Vermont, which is a coalition building convening group which is helping to bring Vermonters together from a whole breadth of perspectives and backgrounds to talk about the next generation of energy solutions that we need in this state. Sitting to her right is Chris Killian, a former classmate of mine at Vermont Law School, and currently the head of the the Vermont Conservation Law Foundation.
You can be in charge of it.
There's a whole set of conversation we can have. But Chris is a long-standing. He's also the vice president for clean water programs for Conservation Law Foundation, which, as you probably all know, is a regional environmental advocacy organization that has made a huge difference in New England. And Chris has dedicated his entire career to making Vermont a cleaner and healthier place. To his right is Chris Recchia. Chris Recchia is the commissioner of the Public Service Department, and he has been a long-standing leader in the nonprofit community and in state agencies across Vermont, from the Agency of Natural Resources, former commissioner, Department of Environmental Conservation, and other positions in positions relating to energy and the environment. To his right is Secretary Chris Cole, who is the secretary of our...
He's going to have to be Chris, too, because we need Chris is here.
Yeah, Chris and Chris sat next to each other. Anyway, Secretary Cole is the Secretary of Transportation. A transportation agency, I should note, which has made, in an unprecedented way in my experience, or in any other state transportation agency, has made providing transportation and its mission around that as co-equal with the need to do it in a way that helps people move around and reflects the value that we all place in this great state on the environmental protection. Chris comes with a background in public transportation and transit and a long history of commitment to both environmental protection and public service. To his right is Paul Burns. Paul is the executive director of the Vermont Public Interest Research Group. And that's a group, for those of you who aren't familiar with Vermont, that is one of the leading, if not the leading, advocacy group for consumer protection and the rights of voters to have access to the ballot. They've also addressed issues like toxic chemicals. They were a leader in getting the genetically modified organism labeling law passed by Vermont. Woohoo! Yeah. And just a quick note about Paul as an individual. He was rated as one of the top, if not the top, lobbyists in the Vermont State House. An honor typically reserved to to lobbyists that represent private interests. Paul is a rarity in that he's highly effective in the State House as a representative of the nonprofit community. And to his right, a new visitor to Vermont Law School is Olivia Campbell Anderson. And she is taking over the head of the Renewable Energy Vermont organization, which is a coalition that is advancing the renewable energy sector in the state of Vermont. She comes to us, and you're a Vermont Law School graduate too. So it's not her first, rodeo in Vermont, but she comes to us from the state of Maryland, where she played high-level roles in the Agency of Natural Resources in the Maryland Governor's Office. So please join me in welcoming this amazing group of folks for a conversation about energy. So with that, we'll pass the microphone around, but I want to start with what I think is a softball question, which is, why should we care in Vermont about climate change?
I think Vermont deeply does care about climate change. So why should we care? Perhaps some of the folks who are farmers, some of the folks who experience impacts from the hurricane and the floods can tell their personal stories about why you should care, because you're already experiencing those impacts. But I think Vermont's commitment to clean energy and total clean energy is expressing already with the 90% by 2050 total energy goals that Vermont deeply does care about climate action. And so I'm looking forward to, and that's a large also thanks to the governor's leadership, but the whole state's leadership. So I'm looking forward to talking more about how we're going to implement that deep concern that I think already exists.
Well, I'll just note one thing. There are many reasons why, but I want to note that today's Earth Day, as you all know, and that earlier today there was a press conference at the State House, led by business leaders in Vermont who are expressing their concern about how climate change will affect our state, their businesses, the jobs that they represent. And there were a number of reasons for that, but it was more than just the several dozen business leaders who were at the State House today, but we announced that we have over 500 businesses now signed on to our campaign. It's a coalition effort called Energy Independent Vermont, and that is about putting a price on carbon, a carbon pollution tax in place. A small state like this to announce over 500 of our businesses already in support of that is an amazing indication of how people in this state and business leaders in this state feel about a changing climate and our role and need to do something about it.
Is this one work? Yeah. So we should care. We're part of the global community. We don't exist on an island unto ourselves. And the other reason why we really should care is one of Vermont's strengths is our sense of community. We're known as a state that can get things done that other states can't. We can, because of our nature of caring for each other and our strong community, we can create policies that can help towards not reversing climate change. This meeting is uplifting and depressing both at the same time. But we can be a beacon of light for the nation and for other countries. And we were one of the first states to do it in the energy sector with RGGI. That other states and provinces have built on that to do the same sort of trading and cap for the transportation sector. And we need to be a leader in this area. This is what we do best. And that's why we really should care, because we can have an impact. We're a small state, but we can really have a greater impact.
Hey, thanks, Chris. So I'm going to build on that and say, we should care because our environment is at risk. Everything that we love about Vermont is so tenuously, held on here. We have warming trends that are going to cause forest changes, infestation changes. Those of you who have dogs, ticks and fleas, right? I mean, we didn't have ticks 20 years ago, right? We're going to have those, but more importantly, our maple industry, our ash trees, our environment. We can adapt somewhat, but we can't adapt that quickly. We should care about keeping Vermont the way it is. And as much as there's a part of me that would like to have beachfront property, that is not really where I want to go. So the shoreline should not. Okay, that was a bit of humor that didn't evidently go over. So I'll just move on. Vermont is also kind of picking up on Chris's point. Vermont is sized such that we can be leaders nationally and internationally on this issue, and we should be. We've got an amazing comprehensive energy plan to show a path forward. We've done amazing work in the last 5 to 10 years on renewables and moving off of fossil fuels, and we need to keep doing that. And it's not perfect, and I'm sure we're going to get into that discussion, but we are doing an amazing amount of work that will that should be a model for the nation. So.
Well, we're hearing a lot of the same themes, and while we are talking about Vermont, I can't help, as a member of the staff of a regional organization, talking a bit about New England. And in the spirit of celebration, I at least am celebrating the pullout of Kinder Morgan, massive Southern New England Northeast natural gas pipeline project. And we all should take a moment. Lots of people, lots of work around a very big region and a pipeline that, at least for the moment, is dead. So I wanted to acknowledge that. I want to pick up on what both of the Chris's said, and as a third Chris here, Vermont can lead. Vermont should care for all of the reasons that have been mentioned and the effects that we're all seeing. But we can pass a carbon tax. We can do that over the next couple of years. We can lead the nation and join with others that are doing so at the high end, maybe, of the policy spectrum. We also have numerous other opportunities right now something as mundane as the rewrite of our stormwater design manual for growth and development. Our pipes are too small, and they're all pipes right now. We're just collecting polluted runoff, more and more and more runoff with more and more rain, and dumping it into our rivers and making flooding worse. Let's adopt a stormwater design manual that's focused on green infrastructure so we can make our communities and our water resources more resilient. Let's decide that the Green Mountain National Forest is best utilized as a carbon sink. That we not consider it to be a playground for motorized recreation and a place where we can cut a lot of trees all the time. Let's let it grow and let's sequester a whole bunch of carbon there, and let's lead the nation in that regard. These are the kinds of things that Vermont can do to make our to respond to climate change and address emissions. Let's keep the Cirque Highway dead. Those sorts of things. There's a long list, and we've already seen a lot of progress, but let's keep it going.
Well, I'm at the end of a long chain here, so I think I'll just not repeat everything and say, I'll quote Justin Trudeau and say, because it's 2016.
Well, hold on, Andy. So, some of the answers that folks gave jumped right to my next question. So the first question, should it matter to Vermont? The only thing I'd add that I just want to make sure gets referenced is, for those of us who were here through Tropical Storm Irene, we also know the impacts of the extreme weather events, the high rainfall events, the rain on snow events, the kinds of extreme precipitation events that are driving dramatic changes in our communities, damage to our infrastructure, putting our homes and businesses at risk. So with that, though, so some of you have already talked about, Vermont as a beacon of hope and a chance to kind of model things that others can't. What are some of those things from your perspective, Andy, that Vermont can and should be doing that could be models for the region, for the nation, for the globe?
Sure. So I think I'll speak to clean energy finance, which also bridges to the panel that just was, the international panel. I was in Paris on behalf of an organization that works in this arena, launching some international work. So there are all kinds of broader social initiatives that we need to take to address all the different pieces of the causes of climate change, and we just heard about quite a few of them. The fact of the matter is that it's really expensive in current dollars. I personally believe we're already paying that price, we're just not paying it in a rationalized way. But if we are going to get people, communities, businesses, institutions, municipalities, states to make the investments that we need to make, be it whole home retrofits or green infrastructure or anything in between, we will need ways to finance that. The cost of this transition in Vermont is north of $30 billion. I sent this around as a scenario, sort of laying it out of what it might take, what it might look like to actually get to 90 by 2050. Part of that investment is automobiles, and we have existing finance structures for automobiles as the technologies mature. But for the rest of it, we don't. And there are no large investments in this economy, in this culture of ours, that we ask people to pay for out of pocket. You borrow money to buy your house. You borrow money to buy your car. You borrow money to buy a couch, for God's sakes. But we don't have the kinds of finance products that we need so average folks can make investments in renewables and efficiency in their homes. We're getting there with solar, but even that is going to change with the new regulations that are out there. So creating finance products that build the market and take it to scale. So it's kitchen table financing, as familiar as it is now when we borrow money to buy a car. That will open up the market and drive transition at the kind of pace that we need. So we need structures that will feed that. In many states and many countries are investing in something called a green bank, which is a marriage of private capital with leveraged public incentive capital to create the kind of finance momentum that we need. Vermont, if we do that, and hopefully we'll do something like that, won't have that label, and it won't work in sort of a standalone way. It'll work off of our good partners and existing institutions taking their work to the next level. But we need dramatic investment in our finance capacity if we're going to take our transition to scale. And if we do that in Vermont, that is absolutely a model, not only in this country, but internationally, where it's under discussion in lots of places. And the fact that we are small is where we can add to that model. The UK has a green bank. Australia has a green bank. Small states don't. So what we can do that works here will be infinitely valuable in that broader conversation.
Thanks, Amy. So I want to turn to Olivia and ask your question. In terms of what Vermont can do, clearly your organization has an interest in advancing what the renewables piece of this can do. So what are some of your thoughts on how Vermont can lead in the area of renewables?
Sure, and just let me clarify. So Renewable Energy Vermont represents businesses, mostly renewable energy businesses, nonprofits and utilities that are committed to reducing our reliance on dirty fossil fuels by increasing clean renewable energy and energy efficiency. So the exciting thing about that is that Vermont's renewable energy industry represents nearly 5% of the state's economy. And those are sustainable jobs, good paying jobs. And one of the things that, in addition to the ambitious 90 by 2050 total energy goals that I mentioned from the Clean Energy Plan, Vermont also has a very strong goal to reduce greenhouse gas pollution by 75% by 2050. So the question really comes to what do we need to do to accomplish those goals? And there are a lot of policies under consideration now, whether it be the net metering regulation, whether it be PURPA rules at the Board of Public Service, whether it be issues related to siting in Senate Bill 230 that the General Assembly is currently debating. So we need to make sure that these larger policy tools to get us to those goals actually are aligned to accomplish those goals. And right now they're not. And there's a lot of, like I mentioned, a lot of support, I think, by Vermonters, as evidenced in the two recent polls. I think Vermont Public Radio had a poll done, and Vermont Rev, our education fund, had a poll done showing more than 70% of Vermonters want more renewable energy in their communities. Unfortunately, what we're seeing in these policies that are being proposed and debated, it will not result in that. So, we can talk, I'd love to talk more with the folks here about some of those policies in detail on how we get to more resilient, climate resilient. When I say climate resilient, I mean not only accomplishing more renewable energy, but also having a more resilient grid. So we are better prepared when those extreme weather events come, using modern technology for microgrids and actually implementing the smart meters that Velco and utilities have installed. That we're not using that modern technology yet.
So I'm going to ask if anyone in the panel has a response to that, and several people do, I think. But while the microphone's going around, I wanted to give you guys a heads up. So I wanted to represent a few questions that have come from students and some of the folks in the audience. There's an interest, Chris, in hearing a little bit more about what's the role of transportation in addressing climate, so I'll give you a chance to talk about that. There's a bunch of folks who have a real interest in the role of natural gas and the natural gas pipeline that are here. So, I know Chris Killian and Chris Recchi and Paul Burns have been engaged in that discussion. So that's just to mentally prepare you for a couple of conversations that I hope we have in a moment. So with that.
So let me follow up on the point that was raised. Look, Vermont has a tremendous opportunity to actually move forward. We've done a great job at trying to advance renewables, but it is at a turning point, I think, and it requires everybody's attention to this. A majority of Vermonters want more renewables, 70%. I agree with those statistics. Everywhere I go, people are interested in generating their own electricity, their own, and dealing with their own energy issues, and we're trying very hard, working with regional planning commissions and towns, to get them to embrace the fact that when you go to the wall to turn on the light switch, that actually that has to come from somewhere, and it can't come from 500 miles away. You've got to start to recognize that there are impacts associated with this that you have to embrace and decide that when you look at a solar panel or a windmill or something like that, that you're actually wow, this is my energy generation. We got to get to that point, and we're not there yet. We're not there yet. We are still in a point where people are like, yeah, I want renewables, but I really don't want to see them. And while the surveys indicate that they do, when push comes to shove and it gets, there's a project proposed in their backyard, frankly, we're not quite there yet. And humans are humans, I get that. But we really do need to move beyond that and start embracing this as our contribution to our own energy future. And, as long as we're on the gas subject, let's talk about that. Look, I am not a fan.
Can I just pause you there? Because
yes,
that's a whole...
You want to stick with that?
I just want to make sure if any of the other panelists have a response to Olivia or your thoughts in terms of kind of what we're doing in terms of renewable energy policy.
Okay. Just let me end then by saying on renewables, we're doing an amazing job, and we can continue to do better. But Vermonters definitely are embracing it, and we're trying to provide structure to do that at a way that keeps rates stable and low, and we've been successful thus far. But the reality is, transportation, and heating, thermal, are the two pieces. This is not really about electricity, truthfully. This is about how we heat our homes, how we insulate our homes, and our transportation methods that are going to require the biggest lift. So.
Thanks for that intro.
Yeah. Just before we turn to transportation, I want to make sure, I'm just sticking with renewable energy issues. Anything, Paul or Chris? Chris and then Andy. Okay,
I got a quick renewable. So today, Earth Day, we are breaking ground at the Fairhaven Rest Area for a solar installation. This is our first one on AOT property that is for going for net metering. We have a plan to do about 40 to 50 garages this construction season under a contract. And then we're developing the very beginning of our plans, and we've got all the proper documentation for Federal Highway to begin renewable energy production in our state highway right-of-way, following the lead of Oregon and Massachusetts to the south of the border. So we're taking an active role in using our already developed landscape and to have several screenings, solar screening, aesthetic view set screenings, environmental resource screenings, archaeological screenings to find those locations where we can appropriately put solar panels already in our developed landscape. We're focusing a lot in the comprehensive energy plan on a transportation sector that uses a lot of renewable energy, electricity. And we are part of a multi-state group, it's a ZEV MOU that is promoting and working together as a region. While climate change is a global issue, and it's great to have a global solution, I'm of the opinion that we're not going to get there without regions or states taking the lead. And as a state and as part of the New England region, we occupy a leadership position both in renewable energy and both in reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, and that's what I'm working for. I'm a policymaker and I'm an implementer. I am a decision maker with limited decision ability, and this is a reminder that elections really do matter, and who you vote for and what their position is in this particular policy arena is critically important.
I guess I wanted to maybe pick up on a comment that Chris Recchia made and say that it is about electricity as well as the other sectors, and I think the kind of renewable energy development we've seen in that sector is critically important. And also just put a fine point on the fact that we have to be honest about the power we use and the implications it has for other peoples in other geographic regions, and be honest that big hydro to the north is not a zero emission source. That in fact, new dams and dams that have been in place emit a lot of carbon and a lot of methane over decades. And we need an honest accounting of that. It needs to be integrated into our decision-making frameworks here in New England, especially when we think about investments that might spur another round of large-scale dam construction north of the border. And from a policy perspective, that's also important. We still hew to the decentralized grid as the future and the ultimate objective. And the more we invest in large-scale centralized industrial production, the less or more challenging that reality becomes. So just got to be honest about hydro to the north and what that means, not only for Vermont, but for the New England region as well.
So I'll pick up right where Chris number 3 left off. I think we need to drive towards a radical shift towards a consumer-led energy revolution and relocalized energy. It's sort of a back to the future concept. And I would argue that this should remain paramount in our policy regime, to pay attention to not only are we driving renewables, what kind of renewables are we driving? And in, for example, the next generation of net metering ruling, how does that continue to support access to net metered electric supply, individual community solar arrays for all Vermonters, not just wealthy Vermonters, so having it be the no money down, paid for through savings, the rate structure that supports that is absolutely essential. And that's just one piece. And then to just echo what I know Chris Recchia understands very well, but just to clarify, it is about electricity as we continue to electrify transportation and heating. These sectors get less and less useful as a construct, and it's more about energy generation, energy use, and energy efficiency across those kinds of sectors. So we have to start to integrate our approach and not divide electric from transportation from thermal.
Can I just clarify for a second, because that has come up a couple of times. So electricity is really important, but we are doing relatively well on that compared to those other sectors. And I just didn't want to, I wanted to get people's attention to focus on the heating and transportation pieces, because they are huge relative to where we need to go. So I didn't want to underplay electricity, but I wanted to emphasize the concern over those other sectors.
47% of our greenhouse gas emissions in Vermont come from the transportation sector. It's, I represent the elephant in the room. We are the hardest nut to crack. We're non-point source. You can't go to a particular place and plug it up. And it really requires behavior change. And changing the behavior of human beings is the hardest thing you can do in policymaking. It is absolutely the hardest. I managed a public transit authority for 10 years. You would think it would be easy to get people to ride a bus to work just for environmental reasons alone. Less than 6% of the population in urbanized Chittenden County are willing to use public transportation. It is a battle for human behavior change.
Got it.
Good.
Thank you. There are a few things that you may not realize. So you're all here, you're enlightened probably about the problem. There are not a lot of climate deniers, I suspect, in the audience here. You might be interested to know that just 2 years ago, we had a climate denier who was the chair of the Senate Committee on Natural Resources and Energy. It's true. And some of us knew this for a while, and finally a newspaper reporter asked this chair directly how he felt about it, and he finally unburdened himself and shared that he had deep skepticism about whether humans were causing climate change, and he didn't think the IPCC, was a bunch of yahoos, essentially. I'm not quoting exactly, but it's not that far off. And it was very difficult to get meaningful clean energy and climate legislation passed through a committee with the support of a chair who did not essentially believe that humans were contributing to the problem of climate change. That's in Vermont. So, recognize that we have hurdles to clear even in our enlightened state. And even in a state where so many people say, geez, we should be, putting solar panels on parking lots, and we should look at already developed sites for solar panels. Wouldn't that be a great place? My organization, VPIRG, has been fighting for a small, simple pilot project in a piece of legislation that Olivia mentioned earlier, just to get a little bit of support to have that happen in this state. And we have not seen support, and it was ripped out, and it is not going to be part of the final legislation that passes. And believe me, it has no support from the individuals who oppose the development of renewable energy in the state, like wind and solar, and who claim to want to be out there. Why don't we just build on parking lots? They have lifted not a single finger to see that this kind of thing passed in legislation here. So I'm just pulling back the curtain a little bit for you to see that, we think about this state. We're a very green state. We are very committed. We certainly have the support of the majority of Vermonters when it comes to, an interest in dealing with climate change. But what we also see is that on days when the folks who oppose all renewable energy development hold a lobby day in the State House, they are very loud. They are very aggressive. They are very even intimidating to people who may take a different position and believe that there is a place for clean energy in the state. And they have an outsized influence on legislation that moves or doesn't move through the legislature. So one of the things that we do need to do when it comes to clean energy is just get more active. It's not enough to believe that it's a good thing to develop clean energy, but I do encourage you to be more active, to be in touch with your legislators. Don't let them get away without being a champion for clean energy in this state, because it's Vermont, and if we're not going to do it, who the hell will?
And to just piggyback on what Paul said, make sure to call your legislators and ask them why Senate Bill 230 has a de facto moratorium on wind generation in Vermont for the next 3 years. Because the bill that just passed that last night or this morning out of the House Natural Resources and Energy Committee does exactly that. And it's in the fine details, and people don't necessarily realize it. But that bill is moving fast, and your legislators need to hear from you. I know we're trying to transition and talk a little bit more about transportation. So I do want to, yes, I do want to also pull off of Andy's point that the technology solutions that exist right now to address the transportation challenge, which is Vermont's a big challenge for Vermont, is one, electric vehicles, and two, energy efficient heat pumps, among many other things. But those are the technologies we have available to us right now. So that means more electrification of those sectors. And unfortunately, Vermont's grid is not been maintained at a level to withhold that electrification. So if we want to have success in all sectors, in electricity, in transportation, and in thermal, we need to make sure that investments are being made to the grid so that it can handle that consumer demand as it continues to grow in the state. A lot of folks don't realize the majority of energy that is brought in is imported in Vermont, and it comes from fossil fuels at peak time periods. So despite the success we have had in solar, we still have a lot to go, and maintaining our grid and upgrading it is a big part of the solution needed, in addition to good town planning.
Yeah, just real quick on the grid. Olivia, you're right, except for that, in the kingdom of the blind, the one-eyed person is king. So I just want to credit Vermont for not deregulating as the other states in New England had done, because the reality is we have invested and we are investing in our grid, and doing more so than the other states in the region. Not necessarily enough, but we're far ahead of some of the other states in the sense that we have smart meters. We got to start using them, and we really do need to use them. Other than displacing meter readers, there are other values there that we need to extract. But when I look around at our maintenance of our infrastructure, our utilities are actually doing a better job because they have, we're not deregulated, they have a long-term interest. They actually are investing in maintaining and upgrading their systems better than other parts of New England. That may not be a good measure, but I just wanted to offer the fact that I think we have the structure actually to do what you're suggesting. We need to pay attention to it and do it better.
So Chris, you've already kind of referenced some of the things that your agency is doing with regard to transportation. Give us a bigger picture.
Sure. So transportation is the grease that allows the economy to function. It is mobility in action. And we have a transportation system of today right now is based heavily on independent automobiles and fossil fuel to make it work. And so we're going to continue to make investments to support the existing economy. So how do we transition from the economy of today to the economy tomorrow and using transportation and infrastructure to leverage that? We have to make strategic investments. So we have to maintain the infrastructure that we have today and support our economy today. We also have to make strategic investments for the type of mobility we want in the future. And quite frankly, with the amount of funding that we get from the federal government and from the state gas tax and DMV fees and the purchase and use tax, we don't have an ability to scale up. We don't have an ability to create sustainable transportation systems at the rate we need to meet the targets that we've set. And so in order to do that, we have to, get ready for it, Paul, we have to have a carbon pricing system. Whether it's a tax, whether it's a cap and trade, we need to have it. And those investments need to build that system of tomorrow. Because, you know, it sort of was like when the recession happened and we got an whole extra year amount of funding from the federal government to stimulate the economy, to get it going. We need to maintain the system we have of today, and we need to build the system for tomorrow. I'm of the opinion we need to do it on a regional basis. RGGI worked when we did in energy pricing and reducing carbon from the energy production sectors. We need to do that again with the same group of states, but we need to do it on carbon, on the fossil fuel in the transportation sector. We need to scale it up, and we need to increase it so it doesn't have a shock to the economy, but the economy can withstand it. And it's a balancing act between the rate of speed that we need to make change and how we can have public support for it. Because we are a democracy, and it's much easier in totalitarian regimes to make these decisions from one person rather than have the collective body and everybody having their opinion and making a change. And think about town meeting in Vermont and how many, we have 251 different opinions just at a municipal level. And so we have to come together, in my opinion, as a region with like-minded states. Vermont has taken a leadership position in this group that I've been working with for 5 years. It's called the Transportation Climate Initiative from the Climate Change Center in Georgetown University. Governor Shumlin wanted Vermont to be one of the leader states. So New York, Connecticut, Vermont, Rhode Island, and Delaware are leading this effort. We're hope to have something to point in the right direction at the end of 2016 that will begin working on documents similar to RGGI, start working on these multi-state agreements. That is an MOU that points in the direction of this type of system that we're going to establish. We have New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Maryland, and Washington, D.C., the district, following as observer states, which was a similar process in RGGI. So that is 9 states that we have in a region that say, we're really interested in this. Going to a couple of meetings this summer, going to meetings this fall. I'm one of the co-chairs of this statewide regional effort. And to me, that is how we're going to do it. And we have to focus on creating that transportation system by making investments. And we also need to engage the private sector. We're not going to get anything done in this area by governments alone. And it's the private sector that has to be engaged as well. They're the ones that are looking at the short-term profits and the short-term decision-making that occurs. And we really have to get more towards a long-term. And where are we trying to achieve long-term and bring them into that effort? And to me, it's market forces.
Thank you, Chris. Well, do you want to talk about transportation? And then I want to turn to natural gas and we'll wrap up.
Well, I wanted to also acknowledge the work of both the Agency of Natural Resources, the whole state on Irene recovery, but Chris Cole's agency on resilience, and the leadership that our transportation agencies can show in dealing with infrastructure in the face of a changing climate. So that's another positive, I think, in Vermont. We need to keep that going. We need to make sure we do more of it. I also wanted to talk about something that I kind of have to talk about because of the history of my organization. The Chittenden County Circumferential Highway would have been a disaster from a climate perspective. It would have sent Vermont on the same path, or continued Vermont on the same path that so many of our sister states have pursued, with more land consumption and more sprawl. Bill McKibben wrote an op-ed piece in the height of the fray over the Cirque Highway, calling it a global warming machine. It needs to stay dead, and we need to factor that the viewpoint that led to the ultimate approach and the solutions that are being pursued into future transportation planning over the long term. And I know your agency's already doing that. Governor Shumlin deserves huge credit for finally having the courage as a political leader to say, enough is enough, this thing doesn't make sense. And that was a big deal, but David Browers said, our victories are temporary and our defeats are permanent, and most of these projects come back, and we're bracing ourselves, but thank you for that. And then lastly, carbon tax, critically important. Paul's really leading the NGO coalition in the state on that issue. Hopefully some funding will ultimately come your way. I just wanted to say that Vermont can't go it alone. That's our view. It's time to move, it's time to lead, just as we led on climate change emission standards in the Clean Air Act context. Vermont was the state. I was part of the litigation team that helped the state, the Attorney General's office, defend our Pavley rules that led to the Rose Garden Compromise and a vastly improved set of national emission standards for the first time, addressing climate change-inducing pollutants. And Vermont can do that. Vermont can put a stake in the ground and lead on these sorts of issues, and the carbon tax is one from my perspective.
Well, thanks. Actually, that would be a great note to end on, but I did promise folks that we'd talk about natural gas, so I want to just take a moment to do that, and then we can wrap up this discussion. And for those, it may be useful for whoever speaks first on this, just to give a quick context on, and Chris has got the microphone, so he can go first. But just, if you take a moment just for the Vermont Law School students who may not know the history of the natural gas pipeline, but give a little bit of an intro to that. And I'll also note, just for the audience, for the law students, for the panelists, one of the things that, while I kind of hesitate for a second to end this conversation on a note of conflict, it is in fact in a community, in a society, in a community where we resolve things through town meetings, it is appropriate and necessary to be able to have a dialogue and a civil discourse around places and issues where we disagree. And so I look forward to this last piece of conversation, and then we'll wrap up. Thanks.
At the risk of sort of pushing back on your instructions, I'm going to make one statement and hand the mic over to Chris. But when we first sat down, Chris was looking over my shoulder at my notes, and he tried to cross out my top bullet. He said, "Can you please not say that one?" So it says, "Pull the plug on the Vermont gas expansion."
It's okay. So look, I have a lot of respect for these gentlemen, and we've worked together a long, long time, and this is why I could joke with him about cross that one out. But I get it. So here's the thing. I know people are opposed to this infrastructure and the distribution of additional gas to Middlebury or Rutland or anywhere else for that matter. Be thankful the Kinder Morgan thing just got killed, because otherwise you'd have pressure to bring it to Brattleboro, and thank God I don't have to deal with that. But the reality is, people say, well, this is fracked gas, and it is partially, not as much as it would be if it were coming from the south, but it is fracked gas. But it's displacing fracked oil, and I think people need to understand that the issue here is, we're using, in New England and Vermont in particular, we're using too much oil for heating, and we need to displace that. Now, I get the fact that we want to go to renewables and heat pumps and other purposes other than, using another fossil fuel. But, gas is better than oil at the moment. Okay, you know what? Look, I'm not going to debate.
It's a lie.
It's not. Look, I get it. So here's the thing. Yeah, no, I do. I really do.
Civility, please.
Yeah. So
I'm just responding.
no, don't respond to me because I'm up here talking, and you can respond later if you want.
Where's our forum?
So the reality is that if you don't like this infrastructure, so here's the thing: get people not to buy it. That's the option. They don't have to buy it.
We were stopping your infrastructure.
They don't have to buy it. And
those folks up along that route, they didn't want that to happen. There was hundreds of people.
Thank you.
When you went to their communities, there was hundreds of people. They all gave testimony against this. I can count how many on my hand that said they didn't want it.
Please.
Consumers never asked for the project.
They never asked for it.
Gas
The
Metro
communities, they
asked.
right. Okay. So actually, building on that point, we are the regulators of this stuff, right? People can apply for whatever it is they wish to do, and we evaluate it based on the merits of the project. And the reality is that when you do a cost-benefit analysis, this is still in the public interest to move to gas as opposed to continuing the current
At the cost of
infrastructure.
land pollution,
Now, so,
water pollution, air pollution,
look,
and
Just for a
earthquakes.
second, just please, we've got to wrap this up in just a moment. We have invited a group of folks who are very sophisticated advocates around a set of issues so that we can be
And your
heard.
invitation said we should provoke interesting conversations.
And you did. This is not actually on my list of questions to ask, and I've now asked it, and I just like to
Right,
ask
so,
you,
and then we respond. That's
Please.
the democracy.
if you disagree with this, we can have a different conversation, a different space, and a different time.
Good.
But let's just wrap this conversation up. Let Chris finish, and I know I'll give Paul the final word.
Thanks. So, look, I understand the tension around this. How many of you have cell phones? Raise your hands. Yeah, okay. How many of you have abandoned your landlines in the last 10 years? Okay, quite a few hands. If this infrastructure is this is a private company investing in infrastructure that they believe to be in their interest. If that doesn't work, or we all choose to go a different direction, you can do that. You've got the power to do that, and nobody needs to buy this. Nobody needs to buy this if that's your opinion. But there are a bunch of people out there that believe that they will support jobs, decrease their energy expenses, reduce their carbon impact by switching to natural gas. And if they're wrong or they choose to go otherwise, they've got the power to do it. You've got the power to influence them on it. And look, the information is out there. It is clear and transparent for people to decide how they want to do this. The reality is that based on where we are, that this project has more benefits than it has costs. And that is what the Public Service Board needs to decide the project on. And then ultimately, if people choose not to use it, just like we're abandoning the infrastructure of our poles and wires related to telephone, that can happen. And there is nothing to stop that. So, I'm sorry that people have this disagreement. This is a transition. It is painful. Nobody has more environmental concern and credentials, in terms of environmental impact than I do, but I respectfully disagree. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm in this current job. I get it. But, look at where I've been. I was here, fine. I was here when this place was a library and studying environmental law. So, I'm not going to apologize for that. But I think, we have, there are transitions that can be made here, and a private investment, it can be abandoned. And you all have the power to do that. It is not about controlling people. It's about educating people. And that's what needs to happen.
So thanks, Chris. And I would say, my organization, again, VPIRG, we disagree with the Department of Public Service on this, and we believe that it would be better to transition to other technologies that we have available. Heat pumps that are run
on electricity that comes from renewable sources, obviously more efficiency. We have a lot of common ground on the need to weatherize and button up our homes and other buildings across the state. We have an opportunity to make this case, and we certainly have done that. We work with Conservation Law Foundation, and even in areas where we disagree. I mean, I would say that we certainly have always a good dialogue and opportunity to have a conversation, and I don't necessarily always expect, although I always desire to have state officials come out in exactly the same place I am. I'm still working on Chris on this one, and we're going to continue doing that. But I appreciate the opportunity to have these conversations together. I appreciate what David's done. And before we turn over, I want to say, I'm pivoting again. Carbon pollution tax is an idea that we really all should get around here, and there is an opportunity for us to lead. I certainly want to encourage the continued involvement and outreach to other states. Yes, we need to do this regionally, we need to do this nationally, we need to do this internationally, but Vermont isn't usually the place to sit on our hands and wait for New Hampshire to say it's okay to do something. So we need to get going on this together. So we're going to continue. I'm going to continue to push a couple of Chris's up here. Well, the Chris is on the end. We're going to continue to push the Chris's in the middle. We have support from Andy and Olivia here. So listen, this is it's a work in progress. But I just want to say this is Vermont. We should lead. We should be, even if it's among regional folks, we should be the leader here. And we have a lot of good people who are helping to make that happen. So thanks, and thanks to all of you.
So I just wanted to add one more thought to this dialogue that really bridges off the carbon tax comment, and it relates to the gas pipeline. I think in our society and in our regulatory culture, we are not valuing carbon. So we are not taxing it systemically, nor are we considering it a systemic part of the equation that evaluates the life cycle cost that then ends up licensing the pipeline. If we can pull full consideration of carbon into our life cycle cost and regulatory decisions and into our tax and pollutant structure, we could at the root set a different direction and find solutions to these issues.
Thank you, Andy. Just to wrap up, and kind of hearkening back to the first point I made about the point that Aaron made about the kind of origins of Earth Day and of the environmental movement in the civil rights movement, and to the real genius. I just want to mention the genius, right, of Dr. Martin Luther King, who pointed out, who pointed us to a dream, who pointed us to a set of aspirations grounded in a set of fundamental shared values that we have as a society. In the same way, we need to dream about what we can achieve when we work together as a community. And I wanted to just express my own appreciation, and for those of you who didn't know, because I didn't mention it, I was appointed by Governor Shumlin before I had this job to be the head of the Environmental Conservation Department in Vermont. I'm deeply appreciative of the fact that we've had a governor, one of the few, if not only governors from the inception of his term throughout, who has talked about leading the nation and the importance of addressing climate change. We have not had a climate denier governor. So as we wrap up, I want to thank Chris Recchia for the comprehensive energy plan and the commitment to 90% renewables by 2050. These are promises. These are promises. They may not sound quite as exciting as I'm not no Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but we have made a set of promises in Vermont that I think will lead this state to a new way of living that will and can be a model for the rest of the country and the world. So please thank this amazing group of panelists for this wonderful discussion. So, Melissa Scanlon. So, for the last bit, we have an honored guest, and I'll allow Melissa Scanlon to make the introduction. Melissa, Professor Scanlon, for those of you who don't know, thank you, is the, I guess you could set that. Thanks. You're dismissed. Professor Scanlon is the director of the Environmental Law Center here at Vermont Law School. As you know, we are the #1 environmental law school in the country. Professor Scanlon is the former and founding director of the Midwest Environmental Advocates, and is leading our law school to new and amazing horizons. So, Melissa.
Thank you. This event has just been tremendous. It has been going from the global to the local, talking about legal reforms, talking about movement building and the politics necessary. And it's really all been organized by students, and in particular Rachel. So you make working here so wonderful. Thank you. And now I have the final honor of introducing Governor Shumlin, and it's really fitting that we have the governor here today wrapping up our event on climate, because he has been a national leader consistently on issues of climate change. He was one of 3 American governors who participated at the COP in Paris. And since he took office in Vermont, Vermont has increased the amount of solar on the ground here 10 times, has increased net metering, and has reduced the cost of solar. So we have made tremendous strides. That doesn't mean we're finished. We are not finished. It's not enough, as we heard earlier, but we've done a tremendous amount, and we have to appreciate that, and we're here to celebrate that. And fortify ourselves, and so that we can go on for the next phase of what we need to do to become, as you heard earlier, net zero Vermont. So with that, let's welcome Governor Shumlin.
Thank you so much, Professor Scanlon. Thank you, David Mears. Thank you, VLS. Thanks to all the organizers. Thanks to the panelists that just spoke. That was, that's what makes me proud to be a Vermonter. And without the folks, I know how hard Chris works for me every day, but without Chris and Paul and Andy and the team doing the work that they do, we would not be where we are. I'm also really excited to have the head of Sierra Club. Where'd he go? Where's Meyer hiding? Hey, thank you so much for being here, and you're doing great work. We're going to make you an honorary Vermonter. Yeah. Listen, to all of you, I just want to make a few comments.
Your explicit endorsement of the Vermont gas pipeline directly contradicts your stated concerns about the climate and the renewable energy goals of the state of Vermont. My hair's on fire. Natural gas is a dirty fossil fuel. Methane is a deleterious greenhouse gas, and methane is leaking everywhere. Natural gas is not a bridge to anywhere. It never was. You can't have it both ways, Governor. It makes no sense to divest state monies from fossil fuel, but at the same time promote the biggest fossil fuel infrastructure build-out in Vermont's history. A pipeline will lock us into our fossil fuel addiction for another 75 years. We know so much more now than we did 3 or 4 years ago when the Vermont gas project started. This is the crucial moment this decade to take radical steps to slow the climate crisis down. We don't have time to play political and corporate games. It takes wisdom and courage to admit you were wrong. Please, Governor, pull the plug on the fracked gas pipeline. That is the legacy your administration could leave behind. Please use your executive influence to be a real climate hero.
Yes. You cannot have it both ways. Be an environmental leader and support the pipeline of fracked gas coming up the western part of the state.
If I could just ask folks.
Just a closing remark, Governor. I just want to say you've been a leader in the banning fracking in our state, and you've also with the divestment of fossil fuels. And I would like it if you can commit to the people of Vermont that you will also divest in the Vermont gas pipeline. We really think that we like following what Aaron said. We need to be completely aware that we need to keep all the fossil fuels in the ground. And just if you could just speak to that and commit to the fact that you'll divest in the Vermont gas pipeline.
If I could just, I appreciate that there's folks here who have other opinions they want to make, but of course, I'm not going to stop the governor from speaking and addressing it. I just wanted to ask that you all recognize that we're a Vermont Law School. We're modeling for our students the way that we behave in civil discourse around issues where we disagree.
So, thank you, and I'm glad that you all were heard. I want to talk a little bit about the work that we've done and why I think we should be all proud, not only what BLS is doing, and you're playing an incredibly important role, but what Vermonters are doing to ensure that we deal with the biggest challenge of our times. And I want to talk a little bit about where we are in terms of frustration, which you just heard some of. The fact that we can all have the same goal, but at times disagree on some of the ways we get there. But I'll remind you of when I ran for governor, and it was 5.5 years ago. And I said in the campaign, listen, Vermont can be a leader on the most important work we have to do. If you elect me governor, we're going to shut down the aging, leaking nuclear power plant that is in the county that I grew up in. We're going to run by a company that we can't trust. We're going to build out renewables. We're going to get energy efficiency right. And while we do it, we're going to create jobs. We're going to put money in Vermonters' pockets by reducing power rates. And most importantly, we're going to finally come up with an energy plan that reduces our greenhouse gas emissions so that future generations have some possibility of thriving in Vermont. Well, as David Mears mentioned, there was no energy plan when I took over. We, together, collectively, held hearings across Vermont, incredibly inclusive process, came up with, I think, was one of the best energy plans that any state has. 90% renewable by 2050. Second, we shut down the aging nuclear power plant. It is no longer running. Promise made, promise delivered. But what about the rest of it? You know, my critics said when I was running, well, if you do that, the lights are going to go out. That's what they said. You're going to lose jobs. You're going to lose hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of jobs. Rates are going to go through the roof. It'll be terrible for Vermont's economy. You can't do that. You can't build out renewables fast enough and all the rest. Well, I just want to tell you where we are together. Not to suggest that we don't all agree on where we're going or how we've gotten there. We won't agree on everything. But this is where we are. The nuclear power plant is no longer running. It's down forever, and Vermont will never have another nuclear. Second, we have 10 times the number of solar panels that we had when I became governor, and my guess is that we'll double that again before we're done. That's in January. That's a big deal. Third, again, much to the consolation of some in this room, we've built out wind, and wind is an efficient, good source of renewables that we should put in the right places in Vermont. Fourth, we are doing energy efficiency right, better than anyone, by literally changing the model of our utilities. You go talk to the CEO of our largest utility, and other utility executives think that they are crazy in Vermont. They literally do. Because the utility model in America is generate as much power, dirty coal, dirty fossil fuel, whatever you can come up with, send as much up to it as you can to customers and poles and wires from way out there somewhere, and try and make a profit. That's the utility model. Our largest utility, Green Mountain Power, 80% of Vermonters get their juice from Green Mountain, others from great co-ops and utilities doing the same thing. Their model is, literally, come into your community with on-bill financing that David Mears and others helped us pass, for the price you're paying now for dirty oil in your oil burner and electric bill, they will literally come in with all the companies you just signed one place on dotted line, and for the same amount of money you're spending for those combined bills, they'll rip out the old dirty oil burner, they'll replace it with an electric heat pump. They'll put solar panels on your roof or in your yard in the CSA, and with our net metering plan, you'll make money on that going forward. Third, they'll whip out the old doors and windows, blow that house so tight with cellulose that you have to open the windows to breathe in the wintertime. And literally, you become a energy independent, comfortable, green, clean energy machine that's using much less energy than we were before, and it's green, it's clean, it's renewable, and it's made right there. So we got a lot more to do, but here's my point. What about my promise was false, And what about the promise was true? Here's the true part. We've created 17,500 new jobs since I became governor, and now 4.6% of every Vermonter that's employed is employed in some form of our green energy economy. 4.6%. So when folks who are running for governor to replace me stand up as they have and say, moratorium, going too fast, solar panels too ugly, wind too big, I say, whose job are you eliminating? Because 4.6%, whose job are you proposing to eliminate? Second, and just as important, in a time when everyone's struggling to pay their bills, Vermont is the only state in the Northeast, the only state, where for 3 of the past 4 years, power bills have gone down, not up. That's just fact. And if you cross the river right here, a little bit to our east, and go over there and, read billboards and live free and die for a few minutes, talk to them. Some of their utilities went up 50%. Some of them went up 100%. That's not easy when you're trying to pay bills. Third, and perhaps most important, and I'm going to say a word about the jobs. The folks that are taking renewable jobs in Vermont, go out and look at the folks that put in the solar panels across the state. You know our panels are going up so fast that you can drive by a place one day and you didn't see the panels yesterday. You go, wow, where did that come from? But you go stop for a second, stop your rig, and look at who's out there. They look a lot more like these law students than they do like the rest of us in this room. They don't look like me. They're not gray. They're not wrinkled. They got big bags on their eyes. They're not trying to remember the name they used to remember easily just a few weeks ago. They're under 30. They're all the people that all the politicians say we need to bring to Vermont. Guess what they're doing? They're loving Vermont. They're installing solar. They're making a difference for their planet. They're drinking Vermont beer and eating Vermont cheese at night. They're having babies, things that they create, bringing young people to Vermont. They're filling up our schools. They don't want to live anywhere but the promised land. So here's my point. Sure, we have not done everything right. But for God's sakes, when you are having trouble keeping snow on your mountains in a state that had 4.5 million steers come here 2 years ago, and this year there was no snow to come to. When you're making maple syrup on February 1st in Windham County, where I was born and raised, February 1st, not a gallon, not 2 gallons, hundreds of gallons. We didn't ever make maple syrup in Vermont in February when I was a child. When you go walk through my sugar bush, and it's loaded with things like buckthorn, literally drowning out the ability for maple trees to regenerate. Houston doesn't get this. I got a friend here from Houston right now. There's no solar panels there. They got no buckthorn because, Texas doesn't put up with buckthorn. You can't make maple syrup in New Jersey. You can't ski in South Carolina. So I know we can disagree, and we will, about every step that we make to get there. But listen, this forum was focused on what happened in Paris. And I'm talking about what's happening in Vermont. And all I can tell you is, it is mighty lonely to be a climate change governor. And you can be pissed at me, and in fairness, I respect your point of view. I really do. You can be mad at some of the things that I've done. But it's pretty ironic that when President Obama couldn't get anything done with climate change with those climate deniers in Congress, he decided to find 3 governors who could go over there and brag for America because he wanted the 190 world leaders to know that something good was happening in America. And guess who President Obama called? He called Jerry Brown because they're doing great things in California. He called Jay Inslee, Washington State, doing extraordinary things on climate in Washington State. He called little old me from Vermont. Here's my point. We couldn't find a Republican governor to go. It wasn't that Obama didn't want a Republican governor. It's that there is not one in America. that's doing anything on the biggest challenge that we face. So my point is, I understand. But for God's sakes, let's not murder the message for the next governor. Listen, we've got a hot debate going on in Vermont right now that is a result of our success. Folks are saying, stop citing solar. If you don't believe me, go talk to your local community. Stop citing solar, it's ugly. Build no more wind in Vermont. We got Democratic candidates saying that. Ever. They say it's going to kill bats and bears. You know, I'm fighting for all the bears. So are you. We got to fight for all the bats. But all the living things on this planet are threatened by the slowness of our action, by the denial of other governors, by the denial of Congress. And we cannot spend so much time disagreeing on where we don't agree that we fail to see the trees through the forest. So what do we got left to do? It won't be me. It'll be you. This is what we got to do. We're doing great on renewables. We're doing great in our electric generation. More to do, but we're doing great. We are doing horribly on our transportation infrastructure. We're failing. We've got to move to plug-in, folks. We're never going to be able to replace our current transportation fleet with public transit in a rural state. And if we don't get serious about plug-ins, we cannot get to 90% by 2050, and we can't fit. Second, I don't think that it's right that in a state that is from both governors over the years, Republicans and Democrats, has joined other Northeast governors in suing the coal-burning states to our west for putting their emissions, their coal emissions, in our lungs because we are the tailpipe to their coal burning. We've sued the feds, we've pressured the states, and we own coal stocks. Vermont owns coal stocks. So I stood up at the State of the State a few months ago. I thought this was going to be a no-brainer. I said, hey, Jerry Brown had the courage in California to divest his $500 billion pensions from coal and to put together a group of really smart people to figure out how to get rid of fossil fuel. I said, Vermont ought to do the same thing. If Vermonters think we should own coal stock, raise your hand. Yeah, I've done this a number of places, Chamber of Commerce, not just the organic tofu growers of Vermont, and the hands don't go up. So why is it so tough for our board, VPIC, or for the legislature to tell VPIC to sell our coal stocks? I said a second thing. Went a step further to California. Sell ExxonMobil. Now. Sell it. Why? Because ExxonMobil back in the 1990s had good scientific evidence that told them that climate change was real. I know that's a surprise to all of you in this room, but they figured out in 1990 climate change is real. And guess what they did? They buried it. They did what the tobacco companies did when they told us that cigarettes didn't kill you. They lied. They built their offshore oil rigs higher to account for the rising sea levels that their scientists told were going to result from this. They spent millions and millions of dollars, and still do, lobbying legislatures like they were in this winter in your Vermont legislature, not to divest, not to sell Exxon stock. And we should get rid of their stock. Well, since I gave that speech, guess what's happened? The argument's made, well, you shouldn't mess, there shouldn't be any politics in pension funds. It should be just the best investments. My argument is, if you think coal is the best investment, I don't want you managing my money. Now, since I've said that, 4 major coal companies in the world have declared bankruptcy since I gave the speech. So if you don't believe me, ask them. And what did Peabody say last week? The stockholders of Peabody and the CEO, when he said we've got to go bankrupt, said, one of our problems is that we've got universities, we've got states, we've got portfolios divesting from coal, and it's hard for us to raise capital. If you don't believe me, I keep being told it's symbolic, Governor. If it's symbolic, go talk to the CEO of Peabody. So here's my point. We got a lot of work left to do. We can't move it fast enough. I don't think that everything that I've done has been right. I know that. You're never batting perfect. But this I know. When my kids and your grandkids look back on what we have dumped on this generation of young people, including the VLS grads, I think that one shining light, little shining light, is going to be what's happening in Vermont right now. That we stand up, that we move to renewables, that we meet our goal of 90% by 2050, and that while we do it, we create jobs, we create a more prosperous economy, and young people want to be a part of it and come and make Vermont a more vibrant place. So I just hope against hope that when I trot off into the private life with my wife, who's here now, and Katie, thank you for being here. She doesn't come out much, but she cares about climate change, and she wanted to join me. And we choose another leader, that we won't spend so much time disagreeing about what we've disagreed about, that we lose sight of the fact that in a world and in a nation where we're doing it right, that we don't let our inner struggles deter us from the most important challenge that mankind, humankind, womankind has ever faced. And that's what we're up against. Those are the headwinds we're facing. We are at a time. Let's keep pushing. Thanks to VLS for putting this together.